We lived here by the sea when I was small. I loved it here. Well, I still do. The wind, the waves, the gulls screeching, the sky, and the lighthouse. I loved the sound of its horn at night. And there was music everywhere, it seemed. In the kitchen, at the hall, weddings, birthdays, anniversaries, well, and funerals. Or just a simple gathering of a few folk around the kitchen table or on the porch. Not much has changed, really.
It's hard to believe that it's 15 years today that my gran was buried here. She was almost 86, so I guess she had a good long life. It was a hard life. My mum was a help to her at the end. Uncle Caelan came from Ontario for the funeral. I hadn't seen him since I was a kid. I'd never met Uncle Rob. He went off to the States before I was born. You'd never know he was from the Cape. He was as American as they come. He arrived in a big car, rented, probably the biggest one he could get. Guess he forgot there are no superhighways here. He looked like an ad for a polyester clothing company. Smokes a cigar, as he said. My mum wouldn't let him smoke in the house, though. Gran left Mum the house. She knew the boys were well enough off, but Uncle Rob, he thought he should get a share. Thought they should go into business together. Put on 4 or 5 rooms to rent. American fishermen would love the place, he said. Big bucks. But my mum told him where to stuff his cigar. She always shot from the hip, my mum. She said my grandpa would roll over in his grave. Grandpa and I were close when I was a child, very close. I remember a short, wiry man with a bunch of teeth missing. He walked with a limp from an old World War I injury. And his hands, they were gnarled from hard work all his life. His left hand was missing the end of 2 fingers. He was my hero when I was a kid. Sometimes he'd take me out in his boat. Not all the time. Sometimes he said it was too dangerous. But I loved the boat. I loved the sea. I remember I was 6, maybe 7, and one day I told him that when I grew up, I wanted to be a fisherman just like him. Well, he looked at me long. He was sizing me up. He patted me on the shoulder and he said, "No, Jake lad, you're suited better for other things." He never told me what, though. Well, those days he had a small boat. He'd sold the big one long ago, my gran told me. The night his boat didn't come back to the cove, we were all sitting round the table, hoping it was just taking him a little longer to come in. But we knew a storm had come up from the southwest, all of a sudden, no warning except the sky changing color in the distance. I always remember that night. I was only 8, but I remember it like it was yesterday. My gran was strong. I mean, she had to be. She had already lost 2 boys in the Second War. But I knew she cried that night. My mum cried too. It didn't really hit me until the funeral. I mean, everyone came to the funeral. Everyone loved my grandpa. And of course there were lots of relatives. I wasn't always sure how we were related, but somehow it seemed we were. Mom and I helped Gran go through my grandpa's things, and it was then that I found the fiddle. It was up in the attic. Gran said it had been there a long time. She had almost forgotten about it. I found out my grandpa used to play the fiddle long ago before he lost those 2 fingers. Gran was staring at the fiddle that afternoon. She was almost caressing it like it was something very special. She told me that once Grandpa had been the best fiddle player around and he'd played at all the ceilidhs and the kitchen parties in the area. You know, I didn't know that. My grandpa never talked about it, which is strange because we used to talk about all kinds of things. Then I now know, I guess, there are some things you just want to keep to yourself. My gran saw me looking at the fiddle that afternoon. I was touching it like it was gold, touching all the nicks and the scratches because my grandpa might have put them there. And Gran told my mom that I should have the fiddle, that Grandpa would have wanted it. And Mom let me have the fiddle that day. I was the happiest kid in the world.
I've just been going through some of my grand's papers. Came across these photos. They're of my parents during the war. I'd never seen them before. My dad was away a lot in the early years after the war. He'd stayed in the forces when the war ended. It's where he felt most at home. Mom was in the war too. She was a nurse. She got to wear one of those head veils. A nursing sister, that's what they were called. Kind of like a nun, only she wasn't. She loved the war, my mom. She'd light up whenever she spoke about it. It's kind of strange in a way, but then she'd been important. She was young. It's where she met my dad overseas. It's where they got married.
I think my mom's biggest regret was getting pregnant and having to come back to Canada just before the war ended. She didn't get to be there at the end, and she lost the baby on the ship on the way back to Halifax. So she didn't get that big promotion she was up for, and she didn't get the baby. She got seasick instead. I don't think my mom ever wanted to be a mom. I don't think she ever wanted to be anyone's missus either. She'd wanted to be a doctor, but it wasn't to be, not back then. But she did love nursing, and she tried hard to be a good mom. It didn't come naturally to her. But when I got bullied at school, she had been the one that took me out and taught me how to fight. When I didn't get chosen for any of the teams because I couldn't catch or throw a ball, she took me out to practice with me. I got good at it too. Good because Mom made me do things I didn't think I could do. But she couldn't teach me how to play the fiddle. She didn't play the fiddle. I tried to teach myself. It isn't easy teaching yourself an instrument, and it isn't easy playing a big fiddle with tiny hands. But I practiced and practiced. I don't know how she stood it. I was awful at it. My little sister hated it. She said I'd frighten the cat. We didn't have one, though. Oh, she was jealous I'd been given the fiddle. I know that. But she was just a toddler when my grandpa died. Dad was transferred to the mainland when I was 9. That was 1958. He didn't like the Cape anyway. It wasn't in his blood. And he worked in the city then. He'd always had a desk job in the army, but you'd have thought he won the war single-handed. He was the one that got that big promotion just before the war ended, the one my mum had wanted. He was a major then. She was just a missus. That day we drove away in the station wagon my dad had just bought was the last time I saw my gran in a very long time after that.
I watched her, waving as we disappeared down the road. I'll always remember Gran getting smaller and smaller until I couldn't see her anymore. I've often wondered if she thought the same about us getting smaller and smaller. Didn't like our new neighborhood in the city, but I liked my school well enough most of the time. And I practiced the fiddle whenever I got home from school, well, as much as I could, and before my dad got home. I could never please my dad. My sister, she could please him all the time. She never did anything wrong, even when she did. If we got in a fight, it was always my fault. I was the one that got the thrashing and sent to my room. And my sister loved it when I got sent to my room. She'd play it up, the tears, and Dad would take her in his arms and call her his sweet little princess. She was no princess, my little sister. Dad got angry a lot. One day he came home early from work while I was practicing the fiddle upstairs in my bedroom. I was trying to learn Silent Night as a surprise for my mom because Christmas was coming up. I don't know how I thought it would be a surprise to anyone living in our house. Anyway, Dad came stomping up the stairs and storming into my room. My mom was close behind him, trying to calm him down. He grabbed the fiddle from me and I thought he was going to smash it, but Mom, she pushed him and shouted at him, and then I thought he was going to hit her. But she said if he smashed that fiddle, she was leaving. So Dad stormed out of the room. But the next day when I got home from school, my fiddle wasn't where I'd left it, where it had always been. I asked my mom. She looked at me not exactly with a smile, more a look of concern, and she patted me on the arm and she said it was best if it was put away for a while. I cried. She took me in her arms and rocked me for the longest time. When I look back on it, I'm not sure if she was comforting me or if I was comforting her. She said I could have the fiddle back one day, but I didn't see that fiddle for a long time after that. And by then I was a senior in high school and had forsworn all things musical. I was captain of the soccer team and president of the students' council. One day I came home from high school and my sister was sitting on the porch and she was playing with the fiddle, with my fiddle. That was just noise really, like I used to make, only it wasn't my noise. She was trying to get my goat, I knew that. She said she was going to be taking lessons. Well, something inside me cracked, but I kept it to myself because I'd learned never to let my sister see me weak. She was looking at me, trying to get to me, but I just shrugged my shoulders and said, well, that's great. And I walked away. I could tell she was disappointed. My sister and I were never close, but after that it was as if she was invisible to me. She just wasn't there anymore. I know I just said that I'd forsworn all things musical after my fiddle was taken away, but it's not quite true. I did go after it a little. Trouble was, it always took flight when it saw me coming. Our high school had a choir and it was quite well known. Even some of the jocks were in the choir. They got to go on some interesting trips. Even went to Ottawa once. So I thought I should try out. I did. But the music teacher wasn't too impressed with my audition. She said she didn't think I was suited to the choir. She closed the piano lid and gave me this funny look. And then she said I should try out for the Glee Club. Well, I thought that was cool, so I went in search of the Glee Club. Only I quickly discovered there wasn't one at our school. I knew the teacher thought she was pretty clever, but I told her what I thought. Told her where to stuff her baton. I got hauled off to the principal's office after that. But I stood my ground and I told the principal what I thought too. I got expelled. Mom didn't tell my dad though.
And she warned my sister within an inch of her life not to tell him either. And my sister was scared of my mom, the way I was scared of my dad. And then she marched down to the principal's office and told him off too, told him that teacher had no business saying what she'd said to me. I got back to school soon enough after that. Mom always went to bat for me. She was the best, even if she didn't want to be a mom.
We never got along, Janet and me. She was a terror from the get-go. Not like Jake. We were always fighting. Well, she was always fighting with me. Not with her father, though. Oh no. Reg spoiled her. Gave her everything she wanted. Maybe gave her too much. But he wasn't around much. Blamed me for all the trouble. We met overseas during the war. I was young, a nurse in the Royal Canadian Medical Corps. He was a captain then. He was handsome. Oh, yes, handsome. And he was a charmer, too. He told me I had the best legs in the empire. We got married in '44. Thought I'd won the lottery, I did. Then I got pregnant. Kept it secret for a while. I was stationed in North Africa, but I got sent back to Canada, discharged. Got sick on the way. A fisherman's daughter, and I get sick on a big ship. Lost the baby. Lost everything. When I got back home, I found out my baby brothers were killed in France. I thought the war was romantic till then. Oh, I'd seen lots of death, lots of terrible injuries. But when Frank and Johnny were killed, I lost it.
Didn't find out she was pregnant until she told me they were sending her back to Canada. She seemed sad. Not sure it was sad about leaving me or leaving the war. I think it was more about leaving the war. She went back to her folk in Cape Breton. Dreary place, if you ask me. Kind of like back home in Cornwall, only not so built up. When I got home, I found out she was nursing in Sydney. No wife of mine should be working. We should be making a family. I never had one myself. I wanted it. But she lost the baby on the way back in '45. She weren't interested in more babies, but she quit nursing. I told her she had to. I'd provide for her the way her husband should, because me father, whoever he was, never provided a thing.
Reg didn't come home right away when the war ended. He stayed in the army. I got a job nursing in Sydney. That made me feel better. But when Reg came home on leave, he was changed. Didn't want me to work. A wife shouldn't work, he said. And he was rough. I got pregnant again. Twice actually, but lost the babies both times. Nearly died the second time, but he blamed me. When things were heating up out in the Far East, he was away most of the time. Said he couldn't get home when I was there, lying sick in the hospital. Well, when I got home and rested up, I went up to Sydney to see if I could get my job back. I was a good nurse. I was sure they would take me. And when I was there, I ran into Jacob. I hadn't seen him since I was in nursing school. He was the chief surgeon's son. He was a resident when I was a student. We dated. He was gentle and fun. I was only 19 when we met, but I loved him. I think he loved me too. But he went off to Montreal before I graduated, and then the war came along. The war changed everything. But we got together that time I was in Sydney. We went on a picnic for old time's sake. He was married. I was married. Just friends. But we got talking and laughing, and soon we were making love. Real love. No one was around. We had our secret cove. We used to go there way back.
I weren't home much after the war. I stayed in the army. I was a major. I'd made something of myself, and I wasn't going to give that up. And then Korea was heating up. I was gone for a long time. Jake, he was born while I was gone. Was already walking when I came home the first time. Didn't know who I was. Meg, she was in her element there. But me, I weren't. I was an outsider. Never liked it. But we stayed there because I was away so much. It meant she had support. She wouldn't be on her own. But we became strangers. My fault, maybe. Things don't always work out how you think they will.
I don't know if my Jake is Jacob's son or not. Reg came home on leave just about that time and we had sex. He had sex. So Jake could be his son. But I like to think he's Jacob's. He's like Jacob in many ways. Smart, gentle, kind, good looking, but not movie star handsome the way Reg is. Or was. Reg doesn't know I named him after someone. Oh no. But he never took to Jake the way he took to Janet. He was hard on Jake all the time. Said I pampered him. Said I loved Jake more than I loved him. I guess it was true, though I denied it. After Jake, I didn't want any more babies. I didn't want to get pregnant again. I was tired. It was good he was away most of the time, even after Korea. But every time he came home, it was the same. If we weren't married, it would have been called rape. Then Janet came along, just when I thought I was done. It's not her fault, I know. I tried to love her the way I loved Jake. I tried. I really tried. I hated it when we moved to the city. I didn't fit in, didn't want to fit in. I was just a mom, chief cook and bottle washer.
When I got promoted to colonel, I transferred to Halifax. I made up my mind we were moving to the city and we'd be a family there. Me, Meg, Janet, and Jake. That was 1958. I could watch the waves for hours. They're always moving, always alive, not like us human beings. Mum was buried yesterday. She was only 80, but then I guess none of us really know when our time's up. Well, at least she had a good Cape Breton send-off. She'd have been pleased. Mom's left me the house. Well, she knew I didn't want to sell it, not my grandpa's house. It's special. It's always been home to me. Anyway, there's not much of a market for old houses on our cove these days. It's a bit run down, but I'll fix it up a little at a time. That summer after I'd graduated from high school, I came back here. My gran needed some help with the house. I thought it was just for the summer, but I stayed longer. Over 3 years longer. There was plenty to do. It was while I was here that I found out my sister was getting to be quite good with the fiddle. After I had left the high school, a new teacher had come and he was teaching the fiddle and maybe some other instruments too. So my sister got to take those lessons. I found out from a friend a little later that she had been fiddling with the teacher too. She got pregnant. Mom told me my dad hit the roof when he found out. She left home, my sister. She left with the fiddle, with my fiddle. I didn't know what happened to the teacher at the time. It was a long time ago, and I didn't know what happened to my sister either, and I certainly didn't know what happened to the fiddle. I think I was more worried about the fiddle.
Mom and Dad started to fight a lot after that. She didn't tell me. I know she didn't want to worry me, but it had never been a marriage made in heaven. But it got worse. A lot worse. Mom had never been the same after she left the Cape. She lost something. I don't know, a spark or something. Eventually she left my dad and she came back here and moved in with Gran. She wasn't yet 60 at the time. I loved my mom, but I tell myself never be what you don't want to be, like she had to be. I'm glad she left my dad. I think she had some good years after that. I think she enjoyed working at the home. Not exactly nursing, but similar, I guess. I think she felt a little bit important again. I hope so, anyway.
When Janet got pregnant and ran off, things got really bad. We fought all the time, Reg and me. I left, came back home, here, and moved in with my mom. It's good here. I have friends and family. I got a job at the nursing home for a few years before I had to retire. I still go in to volunteer when I can. Well, before the damn stroke. Slower now. Tire more easily. Old age isn't for the weak at heart. Golden years, my arse!
When the war came, I went overseas. 1939. I were captain then, older than the conscripts who were mostly kids. Almost 25 I was, assigned as payroll officer for our battalion. That's how I met Meg, my wife. She was a real beauty, and she had spunk. The doctors all loved her, said she was the best nurse in the field. Never had a girlfriend before. We had fun, always a chaperone on any leave or dates, but that was back in the early 40s. Things were different then. Things were proper. And then she got sent off to North Africa somewhere. When she came back, we got married. That's 1944. They let us take a honeymoon. A honeymoon in the war. Imagine.
That summer I was living here with my gran. I tried my hand at fishing. A cousin, a second cousin, I guess, well, he had a lobster boat. But after a couple of seasons, I began to understand why my grandpa had told me that time that I was suited better for other things. I still didn't know what, though. I knew I had to find out. So I went off to Toronto. That was early 1970s. First I got a job as a dishwasher in a restaurant, but I got promoted to be a waiter soon enough. Oh, the hours were long, but the money was good. I managed to save a bundle and, well, eventually I went back to school, part-time. Now that I'm older, I don't know how I managed it all. But when you're young, you seem to have all the time in the world and all the energy too. It took several years, but eventually I graduated from college, and I got a good job in a publishing house. And in those days, you could work your way up the ladder, and I climbed those rungs. One day, when I'd been in Toronto 10 or 11 years, I came to this park to have lunch. I used to go there when the weather was nice. It was peaceful.
If you really want to know, I don't think I was ever cut out for city living. But you do what you have to do. Anyway, while I was there, people would come and go, people of all kinds. Well, I've always loved watching people about their ordinary lives. If they only knew what I turned their sighs and their glances and their movements into. After I'd finished eating my sandwich, I noticed this woman sitting across the park from me on a bench. She looked older than me, but it's always hard to tell. And anyway, I was only in my mid-30s, so what did I know about how life can sculpt different people? But she did look familiar, but I was sure I didn't know her. She was a bit unkempt. It looked like life had been hard on her. Then she looked in my direction. She stared. She froze. She became anxious. I got up. It was my sister, my baby sister. I don't know how I knew that. Just something about the look she had just given me. Well, she got up quickly and started to run. I think if there hadn't been a pond between us, I might have caught up to her. But she disappeared out of the park and across the street into an underground mall. For weeks I didn't see her. Then one day I did. She didn't see me. I decided to follow her.
And she'd stop every once in a while and appear to be doing business with some young fellas, and some not so young ones too. Drugs, maybe? I don't know, but it did look like something illegal was going on. I stayed back. I needed to talk to her, but not there and not then. I waited my time, and when she finally went into a coffee shop and sat down, I followed. She was staring out the window. I stood there behind her. It was as if there was this thick, invisible wall between us, but I forced myself. "Janet," I said. She turned slowly and looked up at me and put her hand to her head and said in a slow, smoker's voice, "Oh, God, what do you want?" And then she slumped her head between her hands for a moment, and then she picked it up again and said in a quiet, angry voice, "Go away." I hesitated, and then I said, "Can't we talk?" "About what?" she hissed. Foolishly, I said, "About things, about life." She cackled and said, "Life? What do you know about life, big brother?" I didn't know what to say. I wanted to run, but I caught myself. And then I said, "Look, you're my sister." She cackled again and said, "Sister? What do you know about that? You never were a brother to me. We just lived in the same house, that's all." It was as if she'd punched me in the stomach. It was true. I had never paid much attention to her. She was 5 years younger than me, and we had nothing in common. And she was a girl. Daddy's girl. Daddy, who I hated. And I hated her for that. For that, and for taking my fiddle. Oh, maybe I was just jealous of her. She had the talent I lacked and had so desperately wanted. I'd wanted to play that fiddle for my grandpa's sake. And she'd been the one to play it. I had to break the silence. I was shriveling inside. I said, "What about the baby?" She sipped her coffee. She stared. The silence was dark. And then she looked at me for the longest time. Her eyes, they were cloudy. And then she said, "What about the baby?" I said, "What happened?" She shrugged her shoulders and then said deliberately, nonchalantly, Abortion? That's all she said. But I could tell she was just saying it. Something about the way she said it. I don't know. Just something. There was this long pause, and then I cried out, "You're lying!" Only I said it a lot louder than I intended, and people in the coffee shop looked at me like I was a murderer or something. She pushed her coffee mug away, threw down some change, and got up and started to leave. And then she stopped and looked right at me, and she said, "She's dead. That's all." And she left. I stood there in a daze for a while, and then I gathered myself and ran out after her. She was moving quickly, and by the time I caught up with her, I was out of breath. I said, "One more thing. What about the fiddle?" She stopped in her track. She gave me this piercing look, like she wished I were dead too. And then she laughed, and she said, "Grandpa's fiddle?" And then in a painfully slow voice she added, "I sold it a long time ago." And she was gone.
The doctor told me next time it could kill me. So, life sucks. Dead can't be worse. Ran into Goody Two-Shoes the other day. My big brother. Who'da thunk? Hadn't set eyes on him since, I don't know, 15 years maybe? He looked like a scared rabbit when he saw me. Huh. I dumped him. Thought I was invisible in Toronto. Can't ever be sure. All he cares about is that damn fiddle. Don't know why. He can't play it anyway. He was jealous I could. I know. He was jealous about a lot of things. He was Mummy's boy, but I was Daddy's girl. You bet. Pissed him off royally, that. Arg. I was thinking of moving on anyway. I owe Johnny a bundle, and he's a mean bastard. Guys. Jake just called to see how I am doing. A minor stroke. No permanent damage, thankfully. Just home from the hospital 2 weeks ago. A little wobbly still. I think they were glad to get rid of me. These days you can't tell who's a nurse and who's a floor cleaner. Not like when I was nursing. But then it's not my world. Well, I finally got a nice place to live. Huh. And staff too. 3 meals a day. My own bathroom. La-di-da. Maybe my dad will think I'm a princess again. Turns out I got AIDS. Guess that's why I was so sick. That fucker gave me a dirty needle. That's why I'm here. I told the social worker I had no family. She's nosy. Then I told her I didn't want her to contact them anyway. Sometimes I talk too much. Gotta be careful. Drugs. The legal ones. Can't trust them. Not always thinking clearly. I split from Toronto after that time I saw my brother. Not just because of him. Had to leave. Got too dangerous. Got to BC. Better than Toronto. I made friends here. Friends are better than family. My dad once told me Jake isn't his kid. Families are messy. Thinks those years he was away after the war, my mom had an affair. So I guess I'm not the only whore in the family. Was my dad's whore, too. I got a telephone call yesterday. Long distance. Some therapist or counselor or something called. She said Janet's dying. Wanted to know about the funeral arrangements. We talked for a while. Said she couldn't say much because of confidentiality. Confidentiality be damned. Well, I arranged to have her cremated and sent back here. She can be buried here in the family plot.
Meg, she got real depressed. When we moved to the city, I guess she tried, but she didn't like being a hostess or anything like that. She got some help from one of her doctor friends from the war, but she was cold, real cold. I guess I got rough with her, got mad. The only time I felt anything good at home was with Janet. She loved me, thought I was special. Jake, he thought he was royalty. That's Meg's fault. She spoiled him. When he got that fiddle, he thought he was the greatest. The noise drove me crazy. Work was tiring. The drive home was tiring. I didn't need that bloody screeching. No boy of mine was going to spend his time playing the fiddle. And I did him a favor, too, by taking it away. You bet I did. Put some metal in him, made a man out of him. He started to play sports, and he got good, real good. No sissy like I thought he was. And heard from him since Meg and I split.
Didn't know at first it wasn't okay. Wasn't socially acceptable. When I was small, he tickled me. I liked it. Came in to tuck me in, my dad. He'd caress me, told me I was his princess. But that time I was 13, he came in. I was getting undressed. He noticed I had breasts. Just small ones then. Not like now. Not like they used to be anyway. He'd tease me, my dad. Asked if he could feel them. I didn't mind. Aroused me. Roused him. Shouldn't have told the social worker. Told her it was none of her business. Told her not to tell my mum. She wanted to speak to my mum. Why? I'm almost 40 years old, for God's sake. You can't tell my mum on me anymore. She's old anyway. I wasn't my mum's princess. She was there, but she didn't treat me special like my dad did. He wouldn't let my brother have the fiddle, but he let me have it. I got the fiddle. Should have taken it with me. Should have, should have, should have. Anyway, my mum left my dad. My dad told me she's gone back to Grandma's house, I think. But she don't know where I live. Live, shit. Where I'm dying. Dying. I'm fucking dying. Asked to talk to Janet. She said I couldn't. Perhaps I should be sad. Well, I am, I guess. But more for the way things turned out. Not a word from her in all these years. Her kid must be an age now, unless she had an abortion. That's what young girls do these days if they get pregnant. Don't want to be tied down.
Oh, she was gone all right. Boy, was she gone. It was only when I came back here 4 or 5 days before my mum died that I found out that Janet was dead. Mom had never told me. But when I came to the graveyard a couple of days before my mum was buried, I noticed a flat marker. Didn't look to be more than 1 or 2 years old. I'd never seen it before. And that's kind of strange because I used to come to the graveyard to visit my grandparents' graves from time to time. It had my sister's name on it and 1954-1994. Mum's friend, old Mrs. Fraser, they'd known each other all their lives. Well, she told me that some therapist had contacted my mum when Janet was dying. Mum had arranged to have her ashes shipped back here. The marker only went up 6 months ago. I don't know why my mum had never told me. Then I had never told her about seeing Janet in Toronto all those years ago. Maybe she didn't want to upset me. Maybe we just all had too many secrets. After that incident with my sister, life in Toronto kind of soured for me. Didn't want to be there anymore. Anyway, after my grand died, my mum was all alone, and I thought maybe I should move a little closer. Only got as far as Moncton, though. That was 1986. I got a job with a local paper, journalist of sorts. Editor, really. Compared with Toronto, life in Moncton's quiet. Very quiet. But I like to come to this bar every now and again. It's nothing fancy, just a plain old-fashioned bar. But most Friday nights they have live music. I don't come all the time. I come often enough. Sometimes they don't have the music I enjoy anyway, and I don't hang around long. And sometimes they do. You know, guitar, drum, fiddle, foot tapping, hand drumming sort of thing. Don't always see the same group. In fact, I guess rarely do you see the same band. Well, they're touring. I guess that's what musicians do. Sometimes they have a jam and anyone can get up and play. Or it's fun. Wish I could join in. But I'm just a tabletop drummer now. I guess everyone has regrets. I don't regret much, there's no point really, but I do regret that. Not learning the fiddle. But I just come and watch and listen now. Love watching the fiddlers in particular. One night, Shortly after I'd moved here, I came here with a bunch of people from work. Most nights you can barely hear the music above the chatter, but that night people were quiet. They were watching this group. I was watching too. They were damn good. There was this fiddler. After a while, I wasn't sure if I was watching the fiddle or watching him. I mean, it was as if they were one big instrument playing one sweet song. There was this young girl playing with him. She was good too. Didn't look to be more than a teenager. And then after a while, he introduced her, and it was his daughter. You could tell. He was mighty proud of her. Proud the way I wish my dad had been proud of me. It's funny. That night I came to terms with the fact that my fiddle might be in the hands of someone like that young woman, someone who could play it well and who deserved to have it. I felt good about that. After that night, I thought about that fiddler and his daughter quite a lot, about how proud he'd been of her. And I started to think about my own dad, which is strange because until then I pretty much blocked him out of my life. But I thought maybe I should try and get in touch. I did. I wrote him a letter, but it came back marked moved, address unknown. Never did find him. Found out a little later that he'd retired and moved out west. I didn't know much about my dad. I mean, only that he'd been born somewhere in England. After that, though, I wanted to find out more.
Life's a bitch. I found that out early. You gotta make it what you want yourself. No one hands you a thing. We had nothing when I was a kid, Mom and me. She worked washing clothes for people, and I had to go to work when I was 7. Worked on a farm cleaning stalls for some rich hoity-toit. She never told me who my da was. Sometimes we get some money sent us, not much. I was only 10 when she died, me mom. They sent me to this home. Said I was too young to look after myself. I think I'd have done a better job. I've got by somehow. Never fit in there. Always in trouble. Then one day they said I could go to Canada. A boat was leaving in a month. Me and Albert, he was my chum, we thought that was a great idea across the sea. We hadn't heard much about Canada, but it sounded like a real adventure for two 13-year-olds. They said we'd be looked after, be educated. The home had education too. First time when I went to anything like a school. Found out I was smart, good at mathematics. But we arrived in December and it was cold and grey. Halifax was dreary then. Al, he went off out west to some farm. Sent me a letter once. Don't know how they found me. Told me it was better back home in England, he did. I was supposed to go to some place in Ontario, but I decided to stay in Halifax. I was sort of adopted by this old guy and his wife. He had a business down by the wharf. I worked there. He taught me how to do his books. Said I was a bright lad. They were kind, not like the first people who I was sent to. treated me like dirt, like a slave. I ran off. The first time I had anything like a family, a real family, was in the army. I fit in there.
It was only when I got access to the internet in the late 1990s that I started to find out a little, just bits every now and again. Over the next couple of years, found out that he'd been born in Cornwall, England. The town, can't pronounce it, but it's on the sea. I wondered if maybe his dad had been a fisherman like my grandpa, but I never did find any records about his father. I learned that his mother had died when he would have been 10. A little while later, I found this record showing that he'd come to Canada by ship when he was 13. 13. Shit. I wish I'd known. I wish he'd told me. I wish we could have talked about it. Maybe I could have forgiven him for not knowing how to love me. Maybe I could have loved him. Oh, maybe. Shit.
Jake called. Helps out a lot. Never married. I ask him, but he doesn't talk much about things other than his work. Says he travels a bit. Too busy to settle down. He's a good boy, my Jake. Looks a bit like Jacob. Seems happy enough. That's all a mother can ask.
It's amazing how weeks turn into years, decades really. I'd been in Moncton over 30 years. Back then it was no place to be gay. Maybe it still isn't, I don't know. Anyway, I filled my life with work. I was never any good at dating or intimate relations. Like I was no good at the fiddle. Awkward. Never learned intimacy at home. Learned some good things from my mom and when I was small from my grandparents, but not intimacy. Like the fiddle, I guess. I really needed a teacher. Over a year ago, when I was about to turn 65, I was already thinking about retiring and moving back to Nova Scotia. But then I got the diagnosis, the dreaded cancer. I was knocked off my feet. Your head goes in all sorts of directions at such a time. But I'll survive. They say they've caught it early. But it's life-changing in more ways than one. They sent me here to Halifax for treatment. A couple of days after I'd been here, this specialist came in to see me. She seemed young. All doctors seem to be young to me these days. She introduced herself, said she'd been in a couple of times before, but with other doctors and students. Guess I hadn't paid much attention. But then when you're being stared at and prodded like you're some strange object of scientific interest, and asked a bunch of repetitive questions, eventually you tune out. At least I do anyway. But this time she came in alone, and she wasn't dressed like a doctor either, at least not like one on duty. She seemed uneasy, a bit out of her element. She asked me some questions about myself, questions that didn't seem at all related to my medical history. She told me my name was unusual, at least around here. I laughed. My dad's family name, Cornwall, England. It's true, I'd never heard anyone else with our family name around here, and it's rare even in England, apparently. Anyway, it was nice to have the company, so I told her about my parents and about living in Cape Breton and then moving here to Halifax. She seemed interested, but she said she had to go just then. As she was leaving, she leaned over and picked up what I had thought was one of those old-fashioned black leather doctor's cases. You know, like you used to see in the old films. But it wasn't. I only caught a glimpse of it briefly as she was leaving. But it was strange. It was a worn fiddle case. I'm sure it was. I got discharged shortly after that doctor had been in to see me. Didn't see her for a long time after that. But I used to think about that meeting quite a lot. I thought it was interesting she'd carried a fiddle case to work. Anyway, one time I was in outpatient, she'd come by again. Right away I said, "Well, that was some interesting doctor's bag you had with you the last time." She didn't know what I meant at first. Well, then she remembered and she laughed and she said it was a fiddle case. I said, "I know that." Well, she told me that she plays fiddle with a group when she has the time. It relaxes her, and they'd had a practice that night. I'd never known a doctor who was a musician. I thought that was kind of special. Well, she seemed a bit uneasy, a bit out of her element. And then she blurted out, "I think we're related." I must have looked blank because she repeated it and she said, "Yes, I think you're my uncle." Well, I was gobsmacked. They say there are 6 degrees of separation in life. I've never done the math. And if you really want to know, I don't think I even know what it means, but sometimes life is stranger than fiction. It seemed my sister and her fiddle teacher had gotten married after they'd run off, or at least they'd stayed together. She said she didn't remember her mom, only what her dad had told her about how Pretty she was back then with her fiery red hair. Yes, I thought, and her fiery temperament too. But it wasn't happily ever after time. For a while they'd both played in a band together, so things seemed okay. But after a while my sister apparently changed. She stopped playing the fiddle. She got into drugs. She got angry at life. Nobody seemed to know why. And then one day she just up and left. Left a 4-year-old child.
Guys, fuck 'em. Well, that's all they want anyway. Well, not Jamie. He didn't want it. But I was pretty back then, and I was persistent. Shirley said I couldn't do it with him. We made a bet. It took a while, but I won. He was cute, my brother's age, but he looked younger then, and he played the fiddle real well. I thought we'd make a team, him and me. But I didn't think I'd get pregnant. 17 and pregnant? Damn. Oh, we played in these bands for a while. At first I thought it was cool. But Jamie wanted me to practice all the time. It wasn't fun anymore. Jamie said I couldn't be in the band if I didn't practice. And the kid, she cried a lot. Drove me screaming crazy.
So my sister had lied about her child being dead. She isn't dead. She's a doctor. I had to tell her that her sister had died her mother had died quite a long time ago. She said she'd wondered. She had tried to look her up, but she had had no luck.
When I met Jed, he played drums. Cool dude. I just wanted to hang out. What's wrong with that? I was young. Life was supposed to be fun, I thought. Jamie was way too serious, and he was more in love with the kid than with me. Jed introduced me to weed. Cool. Wow. Stoned was good. Got tired of the fights with Jamie. Got tired of the kid always needing my attention. I wanted an abortion. Jamie wouldn't let me. Said it would be okay. He wasn't the one with this thing growing inside him. I hated being pregnant. They say you're beautiful when you're pregnant. Fucking liars. I was sick all the time, got fat and ugly, hated it. I hung around for 4 years but couldn't take it. We ran off, Jed and me. Just like Jamie and I ran off when I found out I was pregnant. Ran off because my dad was going to kill Jamie. Said I was a whore. Ha.
I wonder if Janet ever thought about her child. Wondered where she was, what she was doing. I know my mother did. She wondered if she had a grandchild. She didn't talk about it a lot. It made her sad. But you can't undo the past. You've got to move on. Regrets, well, they'll cripple you if you let them.
I wanted to be special. Is that too much to ask? My dad thought I was special once. Jed was cool. He was special. But he couldn't hold down a job. We were always moving, bumming around. He got nasty at times. Blamed me for his problems. Blamed everyone. But I brought home the money, what little we had. Drugs. Got busted once. Jail's no fun. But I made connections there anyway. Jed was gone when I got out. Good riddance, I say.
Why do you get whacked when you're already down? Retirement. Oh, been in the army all my life, all my adult life anyway. Joined when I was 17. Looked older. Seemed a good way to get ahead. Discovered I loved it. the routine, the discipline, the adventure.
When I was down on my luck, as if I'm not now, I tried to contact my dad. Found out he split from my mum. He was distant, didn't want to speak to me. Said I had let him down. Yeah, right. Let him down? Shit! It was fine when he thought I was his little princess. It was fine when he had me to himself.
She called me just now. Collect. Haven't seen or heard for her in 8 years or more. My daughter, Janet, didn't recognize her voice. She sounded dozy, not the little girl I remember, little girl I loved. She were my little princess. Asked me for money, said I owed it to her. Gave her everything she ever wanted, and then she goes and gets pregnant with that prissy teacher. Runs off. I'll send her some money. Can't wire it. She said she don't have a bank account. Who don't have a bank account? Somewhere in Toronto. Just a box number. Anyway, the house is sold. Time to move on. Decided to head west. Kelowna. Time for a
I see
change.
my niece from time to time when I'm in outpatients. I like her, and there's so much to talk about, but you don't like to ask too many questions all at one time. One time, she told me that her dad was the best mom a girl could have ever had. She smiled when she said that, and I was glad about that. And then she hesitated, and I could tell she was thinking about something, and she said, "Actually, I had two great dads." And then she looked at me to see my reaction, but all I said was, "Well then, you're lucky." I asked her about her dad. I was curious about him. He'd always been the boogeyman in our family. Well, she told me that when he was 32, now she would have been 10, he met this guy, a doctor, in a bar in downtown Halifax. Her father was playing with a local band back then. Well, they hit it off, and soon all three of them were living together. She told me that her doctor dad had died quite a few years ago. She looked sad when she said that. He'd had cancer. I wonder if that's why she became an oncologist. Another time she told me that her mom had left an old fiddle behind and her father had taught her how to play it. Well, I was excited when she said that. I felt a rush of adrenaline. She said that by the time she was in high school, she was good, and her father even let her go on tour with him from time to time. My sister had lied about her child being dead, and she'd lied about the fiddle too, because I was sure this had to be my grandpa's fiddle. I asked her about it, asked her to describe it for me. She looked at me curiously and said, "Why did I play the fiddle?" So I told her about my grandparents and the fiddle and where we lived in Cape Breton. She asked me about it and wanted to know more about it. She said she'd only been to the Cape once on a high school trip to Louisburg. I told her she should come and visit Grandpa's house sometime, that she could play her fiddle there. Oh, they'd love that. Grandpa's great-granddaughter, a doctor and a fiddle player too. She smiled when I said that. She had a nice smile, and it was the first time I realized she looked a bit like my mum when she'd been that age. Another time she said that she didn't play the old fiddle anymore, that she'd gotten another one years ago. She said if I was interested, I wasn't too old to learn the fiddle, that it was good for old guys like me to play an instrument. She said it was at her father's and she would ask him about it for me. When my niece called me, about 9 months ago now, to say that her dad had the fiddle and I could have it if I wanted, I nearly jumped through the phone. I was thrilled. So I went to her dad's house one morning. I stood outside the front door for the longest time. I could hear fiddle music being played inside. I hesitated, and then I knocked. And I heard a child's voice call out, "I'll get it, Grandpa." And when the door opened, a little girl, about 7 or 8 years old, stood there with a tiny fiddle in one hand and a bow in the other. She smiled a toothless smile, kind of like my grandpa's. She said excitedly, "Are you the man who's come for the fiddle?" I said, "Well, yes, I am." She brushed her frizzy red hair off her speckled face and said proudly, "My name's Poppy." And then she looked at me and smiled again. I said, "Well, that's a lovely name." She stood up as tall as a little girl can, and she said, "I'm going to be a sea captain when I grow up." And then she studied me to see my reaction, but all I said was, "Well, you can be anything you want to be." She seemed pleased with that response, and as she ran off, I heard her call out, "Grandpa, the man's come for the fiddle." So I've got my fiddle back, and I've got my teacher too, and now I'm finally getting to take those lessons I've so desperately needed. Poppy thinks I'm doing okay. I told her that when she grows up, she can have my fiddle if she wants. She thought that was a very good idea. Sometimes I think my teacher thinks he's bitten off more than he can chew. Sometimes he looks at me like I'm hopeless. He doesn't say that, of course. He tells me I'm getting better. Better than what? I'm not exactly sure. Anyway, we laugh a lot. And we've been coming here to Grandpa's house from time to time. Poppy loves it here. Later, all 4 of us are going up to the graveyard to play our fiddles. Well, at least I'm going to try. My niece really wants to do that for her mum's sake. A form of closure, I suppose. Of forgiveness, maybe? Yeah. Forgiveness. Oh dear. I know it's going to take a long time and a lot of practice to get good. Maybe more time than this 70-year-old has. But I'm not discouraged. I don't care, really. It's the learning that feels good. And I'm really enjoying the lessons.